Chapter 318. The Enslaved Bride, Part 15. Never before had the criminal court in El Fasher city been so crowded with people, as on the day Haj Rodwan was brought to justice. He was accused of serious crimes, raid, killing, rape, and slavery. Some people of Kordofan province believed that the crimes and the brutality of Haj Rodwan surpassed even the notoriety of the Sultan, Ali Dinar, of Darfur province. Of course, the Kordofanians exaggerated their comparison, because Ali Dinar could be compared to no one in human history except perhaps to Adolf Hitler. According to a recent report, there were people still living on the top of the mountain, Jebel Mara, who were scared to descend for fear of the same Sultan, who had died a century earlier. Nevertheless, some learned religious scholars in El Fasher argued that Haj Rodwan should not be condemned for practicing raids, because the Prophet Muhammad, prayers and peace of Allah be upon him, was a raider, and all his blessed companions continued raiding other countries and tribes after him. So, raiding the villages and the countries of the infidels was a good sunnah of the Prophet, hence Haj Rodwan should not be condemned for reviving such a blessed sunnah. In his hadiths, the Prophet Muhammad recommended killing the men of the invaded country or tribe if they refused to accept Islam, enslaving their women and children, and having sex with their women without marriage. Since the Prophet practiced and recommended invading, enslaving, and having sex with the infidels' women, therefore, Haj Rodwan should not be held guilty of invading and enslaving the Christian Dinka women either. For the Sudanese people, slavery was always defined as the practice in which people were sold like animals and commodities. The evil practice of the Arab Janjaweed was not counted as slavery. Every year the Janjaweed militia attacked villages in the south of Sudan and Darfur, killed the men, burnt down the huts, stole the cattle and property, tied up the women and children, took them to the north, forced them to work in their houses and farms without pay, raped the girls, tortured the children, forced them to convert to Islam, and yet, all of that was not considered as slavery. It was only when Maulana Abdul Razak announced from the top of his house that he had a slave girl and impregnated her outside of the bonds of marriage, and Haj Rodwan stole girls from the south and sold them to Bit al-Zubayr Basha, that the public protested and the law stepped in. The trial began with the reading of the charge sheet listing the crimes of Haj Rodwan. He was accused of armed robbery, murder, rape, and the practice of slavery. His lawyer responded immediately to those charges. "Your Honor, the judge and revered jury," said the lawyer, "whatever has been mentioned in the charge sheet against my client Haj Rodwan is not true." My client denied those accusations strongly and insisted that he had never been to the south. Haj Rodwan had seen neither Malwal, who claimed to have fought with him and killed some of his men, nor Ikalas, who mentioned in her statement that some Janjaweed attacked her village, killed her people, and took her by force and brought her to this city. In his statement, Malwal said he caught one of Haj Rodwan's men, and that man mentioned the name of my client. I do not think the court would accept the words of a southerner and condemn an innocent, good citizen like my client. "Objection, Your Honor," shouted Mr. Akal. "On what grounds?" asked the judge. "We not only have the statement of Malwal, but also the testimony of his first wife Olivia, and today his second wife Ikalas has also recognized Haj Rodwan as the criminal who came to her village and committed all of those atrocities." "Well," said the defense lawyer, "if my client stole Ikalas, then why did she run away from him to Bit al-Zubayr's house?" According to Bit al-Zubayr's testimony, Ikalas walked into her huts one day, and sought employment as a maidservant. No one has ever claimed to have seen Ikalas in the hands of Haj Rodwan. The court has no evidence proving that my client took the girl from the south. The court also has no proof that my client sold the girl to Bit al-Zubayr. The court cannot condemn my client based on the words of three southerners. First of all, Ikalas was not a slave, but a paid blackmailer, who was employed to do an unlawful job against one of the most righteous men in this country. Secondly, Malwal and Olivia did not see Haj Rodwan before today. Accordingly, I request this revered court to dismiss these false accusations against my client, Haj Rodwan. After the lawyer of Haj Rodwan had gone back to his seat, Bint al-Zubayr's lawyer came forward. He added nothing new, except that he confirmed what the first lawyer had said, that Ikhlas had come to Bint al-Zubayr's house of her own free will and was therefore not a slave. Moreover, he rejected the accusation that Bint al-Zubayr had connections with Wadmira and Haj Rodwan. He contested Bint al-Zubayr's confession of sending Ikhlas to Mu'allana's house to entice him and trap him into adultery. Such a confession had to have been put in her mouth through torture, during her interrogation. In reality, Ikhlas had left Bint al-Zubayr's huts, and had joined Mu'allana's house as a maidservant, by her own choice. For those reasons, the lawyer likewise requested that the court lift the charges against his client, Bint al-Zubayr. Mr. Akal was given a chance to cross-examine the three suspects or to refute the defense of their three lawyers. He tried in every possible way to refute the defense lawyers, but he could not. He was not able to successfully establish the connections between Haj Rodwan, Wadmira, Bint al-Zubayr, and Mu'allana Abdul Razik. He tried to convince the court that those four people worked together in the slave trade. Unfortunately, the court found his arguments did not back up the statements of Ikhlas, Malwal, and Olivia. Finally, the court cleared the three accused of all charges, especially of the charge of slavery. The truth was that Haj Rodwan, Bint al-Zubayr, and Mr. al-Sab, Mu'allana's son-in-law, had met before the trial and agreed to pay heavy bribes to the judge and his jury. When the cash reached the hands of those lawless judges, the charges were nullified. The release of Mu'allana Abdul Razik was met with joyful celebration by his son-in-law, and some of his worshippers. Mr. al-Sab slaughtered 10 sheep and a camel to celebrate the release of his father-in-law. As soon as Mu'allana emerged out of the courtroom, Mr. al-Sab began to shout joyfully and fire live bullets into the air. Every few steps Mu'allana took, he was made to jump over a slaughtered animal. It is a custom and belief in Sudan that a sick person or a person that escaped an accident or freed from a serious accusation, his family would offer a sacrifice of an animal to God. By jumping over the slaughtered animal, the person would break the curse, which brought the trouble on him. Some women continuously shouted, Sagarit al-Farah, or shout of joy. The courtyard, outside the trial hall, was turned into a place of merriment. Mr. al-Sab invited every shamashi, friend, worshipper, loafer, urchin, rascal, and beggar to come to the mosque to enjoy a free meal. It happened to be a public holiday, Friday, the day the blessed Imam was declared to be innocent of false accusations. So, he was expected to deliver a heated sermon at his mosque during the public Friday prayer. Besides that, the devotees and non-devotees were promised a big feast after the noon prayer. The mosque's hall was filled with the faithful, and some even stood in the 4 surrounding streets to perform their prayers and thank Allah for the great victory. Some of those who participated had never been to a mosque before, and some had never previously prayed. Even non-Muslims such as Christians and African animists entered the mosque that day. The blessed Imam led the crowd in a 5-minute prayer and 2 hours preaching his sermon. In his sermon he attacked the government, the Southerners, the Nobas, and everyone who was not an Arab. He said Sudan needed ethnic cleansing from those who were the enemies of Allah and from the haters of the truth of Islam. He even referred to some officials in the local government of El Fasher by name. He called the mayor an unbeliever and a communist. His sermon filled the crowd with zeal for the truth of Islam and hatred towards the so-called enemies of Allah. After every sentence the Imam uttered, the crowd shouted, Allahu Akbar, or God is great. Many times the shouting was initiated by Mr. al-Sab. Takbir, screamed Mr. al-Sab every now and then. Allahu Akbar, shouted the crowd. Talil, roared Mr. al-Sab. Allahu Akbar, thundered the crowd. A satanic ritual was about to take place after the sermon of the Imam, for the phrase, Allahu Akbar, did not only mean God is great for a Muslim. It was a shout of war which the Muslim mujahideen or holy fighters of Allah would utter before they attacked their enemies. For a Muslim, every person not believing in Islam was an unbeliever, and needed to be converted to Islam by force. If the non-believer refused to accept Islam, then he would be slaughtered and his wealth, property, women, and children would be taken as war booty. This teaching was outlined in the Quran, in Surah Al-Tawbah 9, 5 and 9, 29. The more that shout of war was repeated before the attack, the more zeal and anger captured the hearts of the Muslim fighters against the unbelievers. So, if a crowd of Muslims repeated that phrase with passion, trouble would most likely follow. That afternoon, Mu'allana incensed the crowd against some tribes he named as the enemies of Allah, the Dinka, Noba, other southern tribes, and other western tribes. His brother-in-law filled the hearts of the crowd with shouts of war, until their chests could not contain them anymore. The crowd became like a volcano about to erupt, waiting for a crack to explode and vomit its molten lava. That crack was a satanic fatwa uttered by the Imam himself, when he ended his sermon by misquoting a verse from the Quran. Allah has said, "We considered the Noba for your living," screamed the Imam from the top of his pulpit. The slaughter began inside the mosque courtyard itself. The crowd started to kill every citizen they deemed to be a southerner or a Nobawi. And that prayer was the beginning of a satanic ritual. The victims ran for their lives. By the time the policemen and the military soldiers arrived, the slaughter had extended to many houses in the city. The Southerners and the Nobas' houses were invaded and looted. Their women were raped and their children were killed. The police and the military authorities were not able to control the city until the next morning. By then, the number of victims was unknown. A rumor spread that the policemen and the soldiers, who were mostly Arabs, joined in the genocide and shot many Southerners and Nobas. The only house of a Southerner that was not affected, due to the heavy security, was the house of Mr. Akal. Luckily, Mr. Akal had anticipated the massacre and had taken Ikhlas, Malwal, and Olivia into his house just in time. It took the city a week to return to normal life. During this week, the central government of Khartoum stepped in and implemented some important administrative measures to solve the problem in El Fasher. The entire administrative body in the local government of the city was reshuffled. The mayor was transferred to a remote city in the northern region, and replaced by a man from the capital city. The judge and his jurymen were scattered throughout the country. Even Mr. Akal received a notice of transfer to Khartoum within a month. Nevertheless, the police authorities continued to guard his residence, until he and his family could be escorted to the railway station. Ikhlas, Malwal, and Olivia continued to live in Mr. Akal's house until the security could be restored fully to the city. As for Mu'allana and his satanic fatwa, he was considered to be immune from error, or infallible in his decision-making. This conclusion was based on an Islamic rule, which said if the religious leader uttered a fatwa, he would receive from Allah 2 rewards if he was right and 1 reward if he was wrong. So, those who worshipped Mu'allana believed that he received 2 rewards, and those who did not, 1 reward. As for those who hated him, his entire life seemed a fulfillment of the coming beast or the Antichrist. The police authorities could not arrest him, because his son-in-law intervened and blamed the slaughter on the ignorant worshippers, who misunderstood the meaning of the fatwa. At least Malwal had been able to snatch his missing bride from the hands of those who enslaved and abused her, in spite of the bloody fight. Even Mr. Akal considered that as a real victory, although he lost the case. It was viewed as a real blessing from heaven that nothing bad had happened to the 3 friends during that Black Friday. The 3 friends planned to leave the city as soon as they received a green light to go. Malwal was able to get Ikhlas's ticket, which supposed to fly her to America a year previously, reissued by the airline. He still had his return ticket with him, so it was only a matter of time before he and Ikhlas would fly to America via Nairobi. As for his beloved Olivia, she booked her ticket to sail from Kosti to the south by ship. One other sad event marred their departure. Ikhlas was not able to claim the custody of her baby daughter from the imam who fathered her child. She was advised by Mr. Akal not even to try engaging herself in another legal fight with that dangerous man. Mr. Akal based his advice on his knowledge of the Sharia law, which gives the children's custody to the father and not to the mother. Only a few days remained, a little time for the friends to say goodbye to Mr. Akal and his family and to each other. Malwal wished in his heart that those few days could be prolonged for a few years. He wanted his lovely girlfriend, Olivia, to stay with him and his wife, Ayan, for the rest of his life. For that reason, the couple planned to travel a day before Olivia's departure to Kasti city. Nevertheless, Olivia decided to surprise the couple and leave before the scheduled day. She did not want Ikhlas to feel that Malwal was still attached to her or that he loved her more than his wife. 3 days before the scheduled flight, Malwal got up from his sleep, went as usual, to Olivia's room, and knocked on her door. He knew that Olivia was an early riser, but he was surprised when she did not respond. He longed to see her and talk to her that morning. He knew their days with each other could be counted on one hand. If he could have, he would have convinced his wife to allow Olivia to share their bed at night with them. When there was no answer, Malwal dragged his feet and crept away from her room. He turned back and looked again at her door, hoping that she might have come to open it for him. Her doorway blurred through his tears. How much Malwal wished their days could be rewound so he could enjoy those wonderful days with his beloved in the jungle again. He wished he had met Olivia before he married Ayan. Malwal knew it was only a wish, because even God cannot change the past. Somehow, Malwal managed to reach the living room, where he found Mr. Akal sitting alone, reading his paper. Malwal picked up another newspaper and sat down to try to read it, but his tears blocked his vision. He put down the paper, buried his head in his arms, and began to weep silently for his soon-departing soulmate. While he was weeping, Malwal sensed someone standing in front of him. He smelled the perfume, which Olivia always loved to wear. His soul was revived at once, and he felt as if someone had reached down to the bottom of his heart and filled his soul with joy. He lifted his head, opened his eyes and looked at his beloved Olivia standing in front of him. His gut response would have been to take her in his arms and kiss her on the lips. He remembered that Olivia had suggested that they should avoid any physical contact on the day they agreed to separate. So, instead, Malwal stood immediately and whispered happily, "Why did you wake up so late today?" Instead of hearing the sweet voice of his beloved, Malwal heard the voice of a man responding to his question. He shook his head to make sure that he was not hallucinating or dreaming. He was sure that he had smelled, and seen Olivia, and that he was about to touch her. Like a mirage, the lovely image of his beloved was transformed mysteriously into Mr. Akal. "This letter and this packet are from Olivia to you." Mr. Akal repeated his words 3 times before Malwal heard and understood them. He received the letter and the packet with shaking hands, and waited for an explanation. Why would Olivia give a letter and a packet to him through Mr. Akal? Why didn't she hand them to him herself? Mr. Akal said politely, "She left last night and deposited these things with me." Malwal stood silently, like a statue, and continued to stare at Mr. Akal. "She said she was catching an express bus to Kasti last night. She planned to board her ship to Juba early this morning." Malwal's eyes had glazed over. He stood there without uttering a word. To make himself more clear, Mr. Akal said one last sentence before returning to his chair and his newspaper, "By now her ship has already left Kasti." It would be impossible to convey in words the sorrow and sadness that filled the heart of Malwal, having learned that his beloved Olivia had left him forever. It would be unfair to say that Malwal felt the same pain a lover might feel when his beloved suddenly left him, for no matter how long the separation, the lover would always long to see his beloved someday. Even a lover whose beloved had died might dream of seeing her in paradise or in another world. But for Malwal, there was nothing like that to hope for. Olivia had gone forever and had taken every hope with, as if she had vanished from existence and would never be again. There was no bridge to connect him with her. The few sentences she wrote in her letter revealed that their separation was final. A good soldier must leave as soon as the battle is over, and those for whom the battle is fought must reap the victory. Yes, I am born to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Maybe one day, in some remote corner of the jungle, I will lay down my weapon and rest. Farewell, Malwol. Your fellow soldier, Olivia. Those few words flew like arrows into Malwol's soul. He sunk into a deep gulf of sorrow. He wept silently all day, trying to hide the state of his heart from his wife. Ayan, however, realized how much the separation had affected her husband. She did not covet or feel jealousy for the love Malwol had for Olivia. She had admired Olivia's personality from the moment she met her. She knew it was Olivia who sacrificed her love for Malwol on Ayan's behalf, because she wanted a good and secured life for her. That morning Ayan, too, wept silently for the departure of Olivia. The hours of that day somehow dragged by, and Malwol continued to be in deep mourning for his departed soul mate. The next day, his wife, Ikhlas, received a small invitation letter from the Sharia court of El Fasher city. The notice stated that she had to appear on the following morning before the Blessed Mu'allana, the judge of the Sharia court, Al-Sheikh Mosa Harun. Mr. Akal could not understand why Ikhlas had to appear before the court again. Her case had already been tried by the Sharia, as well as by the criminal court. Mr. Akal just laughed at the invitation, and assured the couple that the Sharia court had no power to change the decision of the criminal court. No matter what the judge of the Sharia court decided, he was not going to take Ikhlas back to Mu'allana's house. She was freed from that bondage, and no power on earth could deprive her of her freedom again. All they had to do was to show up, endure the trial, and leave unscathed. Before her departure, Olivia had divided the fortune she redeemed from Wad Mira, left half for Malwol, and took the other half with her. In a packet, she put a large amount of cash, and gave it to Mr. Akal to pass on to Malwol. Malwol was astonished when he opened the packet and found the cash. The huge amount of money she left confirmed her unwavering love for him and increased his longing for her. Even Ikhlas was amazed by the amount of money Olivia had left for them. Malwol promised his wife that he would purchase some lovely dresses for her, when they reached London airport on their trip to the States. They had only 3 days left prior to their departure. Ikhlas encouraged her husband to leave some cash to Mr. Akal and his family, too. Malwol accepted her suggestion and gave some of the money to Mr. Akal. The lawyer and his wife were moved by the generosity of the couple, and made a big meal to celebrate their soon-coming departure.